Whoa, folks, flick we're going to be talking about today, to paraphrase Rotten Tomatoes in their summary of the review of this flick, but I think it can apply to David Lynch's oeuvre. If you're fans of David Lynch, his films are seductive and deep. If you're not, you might consider everything impenetrable and pointless. And I gotta admit, I'm on the fence here. Let's get into it. That's right, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Jim and Rob Overanalyze Movies, for people who are looking for a deeper conversation about the films we're talking about, the films we watch today. Of course, we are going to be looking at David Lynch's last film he made in 2006, no less, Inland Empire. But before we get into that, we got some housekeeping. But before that, I think it is time to welcome our co-host with the most, the man, the myth, the legend, my borscht bro, Mr. Jim Cheboyko. How you doing, my friend? So were you out bright and early this morning, catching that morning light? That's Celsius, folks. Yeah, yes. As a matter of fact, the scooter is inside for the duration. My winter getting around is, you know what? I still can walk. Most of the places I can still walk, bus. But on a day like today, if I needed to go out, I did not. But if I did, I'd be booking a car through the car co-op. That's what I would definitely be doing because it is cold. Jim, you know what? We have another member of our staff. Oopsie daisy. I think I've had you on mute the whole time.
Oh, no.
But thank you very much, Donnie Bob. A new friend of the show in the chat. Donnie Bob was there to
hey, Donnie, thanks.
Cover us there.
That's usually folks, Dragon Movie guy's job is to tell us we're on mute. So,
well, you know what though, Jim?
You'll be jealous.
That, I don't. Is this really anybody's fault other than our stage manager?
Oh, that guy.
This guy, Luke Skywalker.
I have a very bad feeling about
this. As well you should, Luke. You kind of let us down there. Jim, you were out in the morning light. It is bone-cracking cold here in Winnipeg, minus 32, which that would still be in the minus numbers if you're talking Fahrenheit, eh?
Yeah, they meet at minus 40.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's the
so
common
we're talking
temperature.
Minus 5, maybe minus 10.
Oh, probably more like in the minus 20 Fahrenheit, kind of minus 25 perhaps. But yeah.
Donnie Bob says his gestures said it all.
Yes, yeah. I had a slogan for Winnipeg tourism the other day, or that I found. It was in an old Facebook quote, and it was like, Winnipeg, where Fahrenheit and Celsius meet. I thought that was, you guys can have that.
That's on. That's solid.
Yeah.
All right, Jim, we are going to be talking about Inland Empire, but given the passing of David Lynch, we're going to talk about, I think it's just really, in part because I had a hard time with this flick. It is an opportunity, though, and I think we should take advantage of it. Advantage of it? That sounds terrible. We should. It seems apropos to use Inland Empire, his last film, made in 2006, as an opportunity to talk about his whole oeuvre. You know, maybe not delving into his many short films that he kept making right up to his passing, but at least those 10 features, those 4 television shows, 4 of the 14 relating to Twin Peaks, in one way or another. How does that sound to you?
Yeah. As I mean, there's a sort of wish you could stall time and just watch them all, but yeah, that's good. You know, I have a great fondness for some of his works, and some of them are puzzling, but they all belong to the same guy. So, you know, you can't have one without the other, I don't think.
You're absolutely right. I do also want to, before we move forward, another shout out, in part because of already a friend of the show, Epictastic Joshua. I saw he put a post. He was going to be on a live stream, and so I jumped on for a bit. And that was a recent live stream, Raised on Popcorn with Grant, and who is now our latest subscriber, our most recent subscriber. That's awesome. But also, Jim, I really kind of, it's one of those things, you know, I would say that as much as I love talking about films on YouTube, and we've met some great people, great friends of the channel, people we've collaborated with on what I'd call FilmTube, you know, it's not just that it's a sausage fest, and it is, but at times it can be a really kind of negative and, you know, pretty anti-woke, kind of bigoted space. And you know what? A few minutes on his just watching a stream and how they're talking about films, they've definitely got a different style than you and I, but at no way did I get those vibes of, oh,
nice.
You know,
Yeah,
And
I'll have
so
to
it was
check it
really
out.
cool. So yeah,
Mhm.
you know what? Thanks so much for subscribing, Grant, if you're watching or if you catch it on the replay. And yeah, let's move the machine forward.
Certainly.
And let's first of all, this flick, Jim,
Hmm.
before we get into the spoiler zone. Oh, DMG is in the house.
Yes.
But before
A
we
little
get
late, Brian. Donnie already told us we were on mute.
That's right,
Just kidding.
Donnie Bob hooked us up. Jim,
Yeah.
Inland Empire. Oh, Inland Empire, the log line. I love this log line, Jim. What is it? As an actress begins to adopt the persona of her character in a film, her world becomes nightmarish and surreal, which is way more already than I think all Lynch wanted to say. She's a woman in trouble. There you go. Watch the
Yeah.
movie. Would you say this flick is a see it or a skip it? What are you giving it?
Yeah.
Spoiler free.
Yeah. At this point, I'd say skip it, but there are other David Lynch movies to watch. That's what I'll say to that.
Okay.
Yeah. It's
Well,
his
we'll-
birthday today, so I find it hard to dump on him on his birthday. But yeah, and that's, you know, it's artsy and weird and a little bit remote, but that's okay.
Yeah.
And we'll get into that.
Well, and we'll unpack that in the spoiler
Sure.
zone. For me, I'm going to give a see it.
Okay.
Not that, like I said, like I said in the cold open, Jim, I'm on the fence about David Lynch's filmography, television and film. That said, I would say see this for a number of reasons. One, it is a weird kind of experiment. He does swing for the fence. He made it all on his own, shot it on a DV cam, like a handy cam, edited it himself. His at the time wife, divorced a year later, you know, his wife who produced the show, normally is editor for like decades, didn't edit it. He cut it himself. He's this weird kind of, this film, I think, is an interesting piece of film history because he sort of bridges that gap. There's like Dogma 95 in here, but there's also things that I think in this film that you see in digital, like in in what we would now just call as, oh, that's filmmaking. So it's a weird kind of bridge example. And so, yeah, I'd say see it. See it as a student of film. If you're looking for, wow, that was, I don't know about that, but we will unpack that in the spoiler zone.
That was a rousing tale.
Before we get into the spoiler zone, do want to welcome a couple more folks who've joined us, including Fart Guy 69. You know what? Fart Guy 69 deserves an air horn.
There you
go. Donnie Bob says have been called way worse than Bobby. Oh, good grief. Great to see you, Fart Guy 69. And yeah, let's get into the spoiler zone here. And again, another warning to everybody. We are going to be talking about his whole oeuvre, you know. Yeah, if you've not seen all his films and you don't want some of them spoiled, you know, this may be where you kind of put pause, go catch up, and then come back. All right. Jim, as you know, every now and then, I really get into a book. And lately, I've been into Scott McCloud's Understanding Comics. Many highlights, many tabs.
Yeah.
But one of the things he talks about in here is sort of the artist's path
Mhm.
and how you kind of get the idea. I want to be an artist. I want to express myself artistically. Then you go, I want to express myself artistically, the form, the medium, I want to be a filmmaker or a sculptor or whatever the heck you want to do. And then everyone jumps to step 6, or most people jump to step 6, the surface, and then they kind of work their way back to an exploration of form and content. And sometimes a filmmaker will flip between the two. But I want to read you a quote he said, Lynch said about, this is something he was when he was being interviewed for his show On the Air. And how did he put it? It's like, absurdity is what I like most in life. And there's humor in struggling with ignorance, in struggling in ignorance. If you saw a man repeatedly running into a wall until he was a bloody pulp, after a while it would make you laugh because it becomes absurd. But I don't just find humor in unhappiness. I find it extremely heroic the way people forge on despite the despair they often feel. And honestly, Jim, to me, that's almost like that's kind of the content. But when I look at Inland Empire, I'm like, it kind of leaves me a little empty because I'm like, I couldn't tell you what the movie is about. Yes, it's kind of a thriller. Yes, it's following an actress who may not have a total hold on her reality. There might be a mystery here, but there's so much going on. It's almost like is the movie really about playing with form? Or is absurdity his content? I'm not even sure that's a question we can answer right now, but that's for you and for the chat, to kind of explore. But coming back to what you said, why you said this isn't to see it, how did this film leave you? What was your thinking at the end of this 3-hour journey?
Yeah. Well, it was about 4 a.m. Saturday or early Sunday that I finished watching this. So, in a very dreamlike movie, you can argue, because I should have been actually sleeping and dreaming at that point. But anyway, I read somewhere on the socials, somebody said that what he did, it might have been taken as ironic, but it never was. Like he was kind of earnest in what he did, and that was just one person's. I thought it was an interesting take. It was one person's take. I think you can dismiss a lot of Lynch's stuff as being tongue in cheek, or that kind of thing, or just being sort of artsy for artsy's sake. But no, I think these are the things that, like, he came across as genuine in terms of playing with form, in terms of his attraction to absurdity. Yeah, that's kind of an interesting thing. Another thing that was sort of a common thread, and by the way, his passing, maybe because of the news and maybe because of the inauguration today, but his passing had everybody sort of, all their algorithms were David Lynch. Like, there was times I was on Threads, for instance, about 4 out of every 5 of these things were about David Lynch, and it's probably my algorithm too. But so there was
mine was full of that. Yeah.
And whether it was famous people or people that bumped into him once, or crew members, or just people with an opinion, it was actually quite, by all accounts, he was a hell of a guy, and a real committed artist. So, with that being said, this one, the reason it didn't work for me, I just found it a little bit too, like, there was distance there. Sometimes in art, you do get distance. You get that. It's hard to emotionally, because sometimes when you see the parts working, when you see the cogs and the wheels and everything else working, I don't think you're you're not brought into the story as much as you'd like to be. So at the end, I was very just sort of like, well, okay,
Yeah,
like I didn't really have a connection with Sue slash Nikki,
yeah.
Laura Dern's character, and I don't really know what happened, and I was okay with that. But
Yeah, no, that's a great, like, you think about Blue Velvet, Mulholland Drive, I am invested in those characters.
mhm,
I want, or Twin Peaks, I
yeah,
want him to succeed. I want her killer found. I want to know what's going on. Is Naomi Watts, what is her name again? Is she crazy or
yeah,
is she being undermined? What's going on here? I want to know.
mhm,
Here, yeah, I felt the same way. I felt like, much like the sex worker at the very beginning, almost like a weird framing story where she's like, am I just watching and I know she's crying? Is she crying
mhm.
about her situation or is she crying about the
Rabbits,
bunny people on the
yeah,
television? And, you
which is
know,
visually kind of striking, but yeah.
yeah. And even Jim, I wonder if this rings true to you. I'm wondering if the way he shot it, the whole digital video of it all,
Mhm.
maybe kind of takes us out of it a little. What
I
do
was
you
I was
think?
thinking about this since I watched it.
Yeah, the same for folks in the chat on that one. Sorry,
Yeah,
Jim, continue.
no, in terms of that, I was thinking about that all day Sunday. I wonder if it's a reaction against everything everything that in everything that we watch, whether it's a show about a cop and his dog, or or up in Canada here we have some pretty bad TV. So there's actually one about a blind cop who has electronics that make her see. I don't know if it's Ratatouille. I've never watched an episode. I'm not really compelled to. So but it's got polish. It looks great. All the tech is there. All the crew is there. So I sort of wonder if this was sort of an argument against the veneer of anything sort of Hollywood
Well,
professional, because there is a like it at points it sort of looks like a soap opera, or like a sort of a telenovela almost,
yeah,
with the lighting and
yeah,
the and everything like that. So I that was my sort of thought, and I did want to bring that up as a question, like, is this a statement against any kind of that false Hollywood polish?
yeah. Well, and that's even where, like, if you could say there's a one of the themes he's explored in his films
Mhm.
is, let's say, Hollywood and filmed storytelling. Um, and this kind of goes back to my earlier, is he really about exploring the form? Because there's certainly a meta thing going on here,
Yeah.
and that he went so deep in that we're kind of, and is that the point? Of course, he famously said specifically about this film, I already said it, Woman in Trouble, that's all, watch the movie. Don't ask me what it's about. You
Yeah.
figure it out.
Yeah.
Which I got to admit, I'm like, honestly, Jim, there's a part of me thinking, oh, off.
It's his
This
birthday.
man. I know it's his birthday. He has passed, Jim.
Yes.
And while I did not meditate the full 10 minutes, I did meditate as I do every day. But there's a kind of thing where it's like, if you make something like, heck, Jim, if you make Zone of Interest,
Mhm.
Glazer's Zone of Interest, and they go, but what are you really saying? Yeah, Glazer has ever, I don't know, watch the movie. You stupid. But you want to make something really abstruse. I think I'm using that word correctly. I
Mm.
think it's not unreasonable for people to go, what are you getting at here? And for him to say, no, it's not unreasonable for me to go, were you just noodling, man? Was
Mhm.
this a 3-hour noodle? You know, he's like, finally, I don't have the system on me. I can do
Yeah.
whatever I want, you know?
Yeah, I mean that's what I thought as well. There's a couple other things. One of the anecdotes that was often commented on this weekend was somebody asked him. I can't remember what it was. The question was, but it was he answered it and he said the host said, "Did you care to elaborate on that?" And he said no, which is everyone got a hearty har out of that. But also often, for the works of Lynch is that um, it's sort of it's not the journey destination thing, but it basically is kind of that actually. Like it's more about here's an issue and it may not be solved cleanly in the traditional storytelling sense, and maybe it's just a big mess, and maybe it's just a big sort of psychedelic existence there. Like it's a thing, and it's not necessarily a clean understandable thing, but I'm presenting it to you. I mean, if that
Almost
makes any sense.
well, okay,
Here
back
you
to my
go.
noodling thing. Let's make it sound, let's be a little more respectful of the filmmaker.
Sure.
Well, not let's. I can be more respectful of the filmmaker. Perhaps it's like a jazz improv.
Yes.
You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
and maybe that's it, which would lend towards at least for this film, even though some, let's say, content forms or content or subject ideas he's still exploring here. One piece I read, let me see if I can't bring it up on the screen here, folks.
Sure.
Bear with me. Geez. Oh, no, of course not. I think you can see that there. This is Film Obsessive, Cameron Crane, interesting alliteration for his name, as a great piece here. And one of the things he explores, I'll put a link in a pinned comment later. One of the things he explores in here is woman as other. But coming back to this film, though, a part of me is thinking it is as much as that may be here in this flick. I think a lot of it is, if there's a commentary, if he's got ideas, it's really ideas about the form, about filmmaking itself.
Mm-hmm.
And a part of me is thinking, did he, when he was looking at Dogma 95, was it Von Trier, and that is he going, oh, that's where I need to be, or that's what I want to explore further.
Mm-hmm.
But even Mulholland Drive, it's coming back to Hollywood, myth making, and the form,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, he's the thing about Lynch, I think, is that he can do both. He can tell a story, and then he can sort of, find some artistic expression in that story. I find that the things that I like best personally is when they sort of converged equally. The ratio of, I guess, traditional storytelling to artistic sort of indulgence. Things like The Elephant Man, or Straight Story or Twin Peaks, and I think that's where he had his most success, right? And then he had, if you look at the first 10 years of his directing career, it was Eraserhead, Elephant Man, Dune, and then Blue Velvet. Wow. Like that's like tonally, that's crazy. I mean, they all pretty distinct, different forms, different periods, different all kinds of things going on, black and white and color and that kind of thing. Yeah, he's a puzzle, and maybe that's why people really mourned his passing, because I don't think he's a very straightforward filmmaker. And that's part of like I said, that's okay. That's part of the fun.
Yeah. Well, let me want to bring up something came up in the chat, a couple of items.
Sure, yeah.
One, a couple of things DMG, our good friend, Dragon Movie Guy, brought up. Another man with a great channel. Check him out. He says it's weird to think that Laura Dern was closer to Jurassic Park than current day when filming this movie in 2005. Apparently, we're all getting old. Yes, we are.
Yeah.
And then he goes on to say in a subsequent tweet, and this might be the tweet, post of the night, message of the night. Doesn't this whole weekend feel a bit like a David Lynch film? The orange oligarch taking the oath, the richest man in the world giving let's call what it is, a Nazi salute. Where's Lynch to commentate? You know?
Yeah.
And then Donnie Bob, he mentions there's a 4-hour Twin Peaks analysis. The channel is Twin Perfect, and how much it really consolidated, a deep dive, a deep exploration into the man's oeuvre. I would also, though, and I actually put in the description, folks, a couple of videos and a link to a playlist. Maggie Mae Fish, creator here, far bigger than what we got going here on Jim and Rob Overanalyze Movies. She did a great piece months, maybe over a year ago, about Kubrick versus Lynch. The artist doesn't have to suffer for great art. And it wasn't so much a discussion of their competing art forms, it was more their production style, and especially how it relates to women in film, which I think comes back to this film and a number of his films, and how much, at least based on Maggie Mae Fish's interpretation and her research, how much kinder Lynch was to his talent, and how much, how safe a space, as creepy as his subject matter could be. This was a man that many men and women, but especially women, trusted long before everyone else. Everyone should have every film production should have an intimacy coordinator. But long before that, he was one of those directors where he could explore really creepy subjects, real weird body stuff. You and I, or at least I, criticized a number of his themes in his version of Dune, but his talent felt safe, felt respected on his films. And so I strongly recommend watch that. Plus, she's got a podcast. She's another big fan of David Lynch. Her and I can't remember his name, her podcast partner, but they call it Lynch Pins, which that's just an awesome name.
Yeah.
Another one, I think, folks, and this is something I want to bounce off of everyone, especially given the film we're talking about here. Steve Shives, another creator I'm a big fan of on YouTube. He had a nice little, almost like a eulogy, but where he really explored his feelings about Lynch and his films. And one of the things he said, Jim, was how his films to him felt that invited you in. They didn't necessarily explain anything, but they invited you.
Yeah.
And I would say some of them did, and did that very well.
Yeah.
Twin Peaks is a great example. I think Mulholland Drive is a great example, because you stuck with it. As weird as it got, you were in it. You know,
I've been watching a little Rick and Morty. Oh, this party's really weird, Rick. So that's when you said the invitation thing. That's sort of what I thought. But yeah, no, I get that. And I don't think he was an exclusive thing, but you know, whether or not you enjoyed it, you can really divide his stuff up into. It's sort of strange what he did when he did it. You know, like the movies were a trip, definitely, and I think Peaks.
Say that again. You glitched out for a second.
Yeah. It was the thinking power of my brain. No. But after Twin Peaks, I remember distinctly going into his next movie. My wife and I went to go see that, and yeah, it was so weird, and it was so non-Twin Peaksy. It's almost like seeing Bob Dylan in concert, where it's like, that's not the melody, and you know, he sang that differently. So, but you know, all the more power to him. And I'll illustrate it this way. I've been getting a little bit into film photography lately, and I found like so many others, and I found a film on Tubi called Grain, Analog Renaissance. And so it's all about the approaches to film photography and that sort of thing. And they really made a distinction between, and not in a bad way, not in a competitive way, but between digital and film photography, whereas the digital often sought to capture the sharpness and the reality of things almost in a journalistic way, whereas film, it can be different every time, and you can engineer it. You can cut holes in your camera to let in like light leaks, so every picture will be different, you know, and you can develop the film with river water from the nearby river as opposed to just tap water, things like that. And so that distinction, and just having seen that this week, it made me think a lot about David Lynch, is that, you know, he sort of combined those approaches for me in some of the things that I like best from him. But yeah, they're two different distinct ways to approach things. And the artistic, even if you don't necessarily get it, is not necessarily a bad thing.
No, I would say though, and I think that's,
Right,
I'll put this to you, and I will put this to the chat. For me though, here's my answer to the question. I kind of get what Steve was saying about invitation.
Yes. Yeah.
But I got to admit, I don't think this film, I agree with you about not getting it. And again, I think it's playing with the form, but I don't think this film is inviting in the way his other work is.
Mm-hmm.
You know, inviting us to join him on this exploration. There is, and I think it is in the form to a degree, you know, it kind of, I'm allowed to watch, but he doesn't care what I think.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not being invited. You know, there's somebody who says, yeah, come on this road trip. And then there's the person who says, well, yeah, okay, you can come with. I'm going to do what I'm going to do. I'm not going to engage with you. And I think this is maybe one of the things, maybe not as harsh as the way Rotten Tomatoes summarized it, but I do feel it kind of, this film at least, off-putting. Like kind of you didn't need me here. And I think art does need an audience. It's completed with an audience. Yeah. Jim, but before I want to hear what you think about that. I want to know what the chat thinks about that. But first, the chat has been chatting away, and I want to catch up with them quickly. Mr. Chaboyko, we've got
Shashank's here.
Shashank is here. It's great to see him.
Whoopsie.
Whoa. That's new.
Well, you know, sometimes you press it. Here we go. All right. Shashank, great to see you here. Donnie Bob had to jet, but he's really glad he subbed. We, Donnie Bob, are really glad you subbed.
Yes.
Fart Guy 69, he's never seen Inland Empire before, but kind of going back to what DMG was saying, how did he put it here? Just watched The Straight Story and Lost Highway back to back. I think Donnie Bob said it perfectly when he goes, wow, nice trajectory. Yeah. DMG says, he's, how did he put it? Always down for the weird. Yeah, and I think DMG, that is one of the reasons I think this is a see it. It may not be the highlight of his 10 films, but yeah, they're all worth checking out. Okay, what else? Jelly Duck, he did actually make a Doom film. It was the first adaptation, 1984. I will, folks, I'll put a link somewhere up here.
We watched it.
We did. I remember seeing it in the theaters. I'm sure you do as well, Jim.
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
We did. It was one of in our earlier phase of Jim and Rob Overanalyze Movies. So I'll put a link to that live stream up here. Shashank says David Lynch's movies are an absolute inspiration for him. And yeah, Jim, you might even see a little taste of that in Shashank's recent piece he sent us, eh?
Yeah.
Weird, but feels like a fever dream. Such an inspiration.
Sidney Barrett.
Oh, these guys just keep going back and forth about how wonderful they are. But what about us, Jim? Wither us. Okay, actually, that is a perfect time to beg you all for a like, a subscribe, and what else do we got to ringy-ding that bell, folks?
Just that there's somebody else named Sidney Barrett who says, I really want to watch this movie. So,
there we go.
Yep.
Sidney Barrett, welcome to Jim and Rob Overanalyze Movies. Great to see you in the chat. Sydney, I would, as I said before, Jim, it was a skip it. For me, I think it's a see it as a student of film, as a student of David Lynch, and maybe to see him in his last movie, his last feature-length film, exploring the form, as opposed to necessarily exploring a particular idea. But that, Jim, does make me think it's time to talk about the social nutrition checklist.
Oh, yes.
To get into some of the politics of not just David Lynch's, not just this film, but David Lynch's films in general, because I think there is something maybe unintentional, but it is there. Folks, for those of you who don't know, we do like to break down these films on metrics that Jim and I feel are important, separate from the film. And that starts with, first of all, how it was made. Would it have won a reframe stamp? Well, it was 2006, so no, but it could have. Woman star, woman lead. Laura Dern is the lead. Another thing is the producer, Ms. Sweeney, that's enough to be considered for a reframe stamp. Of course, they have other metrics. It is possible. You can't give it to them, but it is possible. Or it could have been possible. So I got a question mark there. We can't give them the points, but, you know. Was it union made? And not as far as I can tell. Actually, he went to Europe. Most of it was shot in Poland.
Poland, yeah.
Yeah. Does it pass the Bechdel test right out of the gate? On the story side, does it have a working class perspective? No. I would, you know what? I'd love to hear what you think, Jim. and even what the chat thinks, but I don't think it does. I think, and this is, I guess, what hooks into, I think, a main theme of David Lynch's films in general for me,
Mhm.
is that they are, let's say, middle class or so-called middle class. And, you know, if you think of Black Velvet or Blue Velvet, um, even Mulholland Drive, you know, there's this kind of small town ideal, and
Mhm.
how, let's say, the big city might or Hollywood might, that there are evil out there that you might not see, and he's exposing that, which I actually think is a really middle class kind of view of the world.
Mhm.
Um, whereas you know, neither you or I grew up with any kind, not even not, not not even yeah, more like 10 spoons in our mouths.
Yeah.
But yeah, you know what? Myself, grown up working class, known poverty, a part of me is like, I kind of get where he had this middle class life. His parents loved each other through his whole life. And so I think when he moved to the big city and he learned about stuff, he's like, wow, there really is some terrible things. And heck, there could have been terrible things happening in my small town. Somebody like me, and this may be one of the reasons I have a tough time with his work, Jim,
Mhm.
is I'm like, well, A, man. Yeah. The world can suck.
Yeah.
You know, it's not a mystery, actually. Maybe your parents kept it from you, but it's not that hard to figure out. And so I think there's something about that, even in this film, where you get maybe Eastern European women being smuggled over. It's got a hint, a flavor of white slavery, you
Yeah.
know, and whereas, you know, you watch something like Anara, as we did, we'll put a link to that wonderful film. Definitely see it. We had a great deep dive last week on it. There, you're like, oh, this is a realistic portrayal of an aspect of sex work, and definitely a working class perspective, and, you know, a lot more nuanced a view. David Lynch, yeah, he goes more for an extreme to look at something. I don't know. What do you think about that? And that goes for everybody in the chat. What are we thinking?
Well, you know, one of the things about this movie is that there were strong echoes of other movies that he's done in this. So I didn't think it was particularly new territory for him. The subtitle, "A Woman in Trouble," that can probably describe over half of his oeuvre. Probably not Elephant Man, not Straight Story or Eraserhead. I'm not sure about the others, but yeah, Women in Peril. It was his go-to, I think, and you know, maybe every artist tends to be sort of obsessed about a few different things. They sometimes they hit the same themes over and over, and I think this is one of them.
Yeah.
Is it, but you know, Blue Velvet, A Woman in Trouble, Twin Peaks, a woman that had been in trouble, you know, Wild at Heart, you know.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Well,
and this,
well, at
you
the
know, this,
same time, like one of the first portrayals of a trans woman, positive portrayals. I
Mhm.
mean, it was David Duchovny playing the trans woman, but yeah, like I come back to Maggie Mae Fish's interpretation and kind of go, well, it's not. Yeah, there's a theme here, and this is why I like this idea of woman as other. I
Mhm.
think is worth looking at, because some of it could be that my interpretation is bound up not just in my class but my gender.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Whereas I could imagine if you're a middle class woman, educated like Maggie Mae Fish. This is not again a huge fan, but yeah, it's you know, I think she has a certain angle on it that is foreign to my experience, let's
Mhm.
say.
Yeah.
And so she's seeing things are ringing truer to her in her heart. Then I'm like, what the
Yeah.
yeah. DMG. Oh, yeah, Sydney. I mentioned it in the chat, but yeah, Jim and I we're both in Canada. We had to rent it on YouTube, but it was only $3.99.
Yeah, that's yeah.
Yeah,
Shop around definitely
yeah,
when you're looking at. There can be a wide variety of prices there. So definitely
yeah,
check out different streamers when you're
yeah,
looking to rent something
yeah.
online. Or yes, you are renting. I don't know why I got the finger quotes, but
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we had to.
yeah.
Um, uh, well, let me put this to the chat. I feel I'm on solid ground on um, let's say the class politics of the piece and all his work. That said, is there something we're just inherently missing? You know, as a working class white guy up here in Canada, that maybe that speaking to all women is a tough one because you got to fold in race there as well. You
Mm.
know, the experience of a whether she's middle class or not, the black woman's experience in the United States because his work is I don't know. Would you like it is a white experience?
Seems to be, yeah,
You
yeah.
know, would that be safe to say? Would that be fair to say?
I
Never
think
mind
so, yeah.
safe. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think so. I looking back, and I haven't made a chart or anything, but yeah, most of his characters seem to be, from that crew. But
Yeah. Well, and again, and not just that crew, but a small town, middle class.
mhm.
Not to say not to say that there is no poor people in his work, but his protagonists seem to be middle class.
Mhm.
Um, yeah. I don't know. That's kind of my thinking on that.
Yeah, with this one, I sort of wondered what the Polish connection was because it starts off with Grace Zabriskie as the neighbor coming over to talk to Laura Dern, and she's obviously Eastern European and starts. They have this weird Lynchian conversation. It almost plays like a theater piece or
Well,
like a art video installation.
but
By the way,
he's
when I
in
said art,
part of his work, hasn't it?
what's
Hasn't he?
that?
I think he's played in others of his films. Let me.
That he has that she
Yeah,
has.
the Polish guy at
Oh
the
yeah,
beginning. Yeah,
yeah. He tends to go back to the well a lot of times. You saw Laura Herring at the end over the end
yeah,
credits here, and I think Naomi Watts had a voice. You watch the credits; she had a voice part, and so yeah, he tends to have a crew that he hits on upon. That he
yeah.
brings into his projects and stuff like that. I just wanted to mention incidentally earlier when I said the difference between storytelling and art, I sort of meant that sort of weird kind of that art, that sort of indulgence, not just artistic in itself. So
Yeah.
I just wanted to make the distinction. Of course, cinema is art, so I sort of misspoke there. But anyhow,
I didn't. Oh, okay. Well, good clarification. I don't think I interpreted that way, but
no,
just
no.
in case. What do you, if we can apply a meaning? I've certainly talked about the form. There is kind of a narrative here.
There is, yeah.
What do you think the movie's about? Like, if we were to say, like, what is the emotional story?
Yeah. I think it's people getting lost in a bigger story. You know, the actress Nikki gets lost in her character's
Sue
life.
Blue.
Sue Blue. And there's actually kind of a neat part in the first act, and they're doing a little run through of the script in the studio, and there's an intruder. and Justin Theroux's character gets up to what's his character's name? Anyway, Justin Theroux gets up to sort of pursue this character or see who this, it's a closed set. Who's here? And just to check, who is back there. Eventually, we learn that it's Laura Dern herself who's come around and is looking through the curtains at
who's observing
herself.
Yeah.
And the three others, including Jeremy Irons as the director there.
Which is one of the gags in the very opening, or not the opening scene. Is it the where another Lynch, part of Lynch's troupe.
Yeah.
The weird neighbor.
Yeah, Grace Zabriskie, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. They're very, I'm from Transylvania.
Yeah.
She doesn't actually say that.
No,
but that, you tomorrow will be right there. And then they look, and it's set up like at the beginning of a theater scene where they're all just sitting there, and then they perform.
Yeah. There's there's elements of sort of like theater in this, and art video installation, and all kinds of different things. Apparently the Rabbit Family was an online creation that he had been working on, and
one of his web series.
Yeah.
And a bit of from that an anthology thing he did on HBO, I think. Sorry, continue.
Yeah, no, just that there's so there is something here, and every once in a while you go, oh, okay, that's something I can hold on to. That's not a dreamlike state, but I think it's just sort of retaining your own. I think it's about retaining one's own identity and not getting lost in a bigger sort of a story or what have you. There's the whole thing about Lost Girls, and then I did watch the ending, the last 10 minutes again, and I still
even going back to the sex workers.
Yes, yeah, yeah. And I'm not entirely sure what happened at the end, but a family was reunited, and Laura Dern was observing this, and But I have to say, though, in something that feels like almost like an improv exercise with a lot of the characters, Laura Dern is, if you ever taken a drama class and you're with somebody who's like super motivated to do really well, she really just digs in this.
Yeah.
And her I bought everything she was doing. I didn't understand probably the story in total, but man, she was super committed. And it reminded me when I took a few drama classes in university, there's always that one person that was like, okay, this person's going to do something. Yeah. And she was just like so committed, stepped right into it and was up for all the challenges, and got messy and got her hands dirty, literally. And it was a great performance in a puzzling movie. So let's
and I think that's one of those things why it's still a see it. Maybe not the top of the David Lynch list, but we have said see it to worse films than this, to weirder films than this.
That's true.
I think maybe the only way you might qualify it is it's like, well, it isn't Mulholland Drive, it isn't, but it is Lynch. It's not him phoning it in.
No.
You don't ever feel like, oh, he was losing his touch. More like, I'm going to get even weirder now. But, at the same time, not being that inaccessible, like it's strange, but you're not going, well, what the, I think at the end, kind of like what you said, Jim, earlier, it's at the end, you're like, why am I here? I still feel like somebody said, you can come along, but I don't care if you come or you don't.
Yeah.
You don't have any say on what route we're taking. You have no say at all. And at the end, I really won't care whether you enjoyed it or not. I do want to check in on the chat. First of all, just for Fart Guy 69s, saw a funny tweet from a black guy to the effect of checking on your white friends today. A guy named David Lynch died. You know what that deserves? A shout out. A full round of applause for Far Cry 69. He also mentioned earlier on a more, serious note, he's like, Lynch was a painter. Yeah, that's what he trained as, a painter, art student. Probably didn't read much Marx or critical theory. I'm adding the critical, he said theory, but yeah, no, I don't think he did. Which I think is actually I don't think he did either. I agree with you, but I'm not sure whether he did or didn't. Would that have changed his filmmaking? I think his class kind of bound him into a certain worldview. And even if he had read Marx, I don't think it would magically change. He'd be like, oh, okay, now I know what that is. Anyway, back to my weird paintings. And that's too pejorative. I don't mean it that pejoratively.
Yeah.
But yeah, would it have changed the major thrust of his work? I suspect not. I think it's worth looking at because it sort of places Lynch actually in American cinema, American filmmaking, American storytelling. And while he's observing the form and maybe criticizing it a little or trying to push it or experiment with it, he still has many of the assumptions that you can see in, what's his name? Good grief. Married Helen Bonham Carter.
Yeah. Just two old guys trying to remember names. Tim
Burton.
Tim
Burton, that obsession with, and you see this in a lot of American film, the obsession with this ideal life in the suburbs or a small town. Yeah. He may be the weird, hey, I think there's creepy crap going on under the surface guy, but it's still this sort of and I'm going to put air quotes on American, the American ideal of that suburbs or small town white picket fence life, which is so not the experience of the vast majority of Americans. That's just not their lived reality. But you would think if all you actually ever watched is American film, that you may be led to believe that is the cultural ideal. And even in his film. So I think that's maybe where theory can help us when we look at it. But yeah, your point is well made. DMG makes an interesting couple of comments and his usual smart remarks, which is one of the reasons we love him, Jim.
Wugga wugga.
If Denis Villeneuve were going to remake Inland Empire, would he cast Timothée Chalamet as the title character stuck in traffic on the interstate? Smartass. Where are we here? DMG. Oh, a little more. Wait a second. I got to get ready for this. Richard Gere announced he's leaving the USA soon. Republic of Gerbils. Watch out. One more.
Woo.
Yeah.
That was good. That was tight. The timing of that was good.
Wugga wugga. That's what I need. I may actually I only own one Funko Pop. Many thanks to my good friend, my co-host, Jim, one Christmas. And for whatever reason, my C-cam has gone out, so I can't focus on it. Yeah, Luke. Once again, Luke has let us down. Our floor manager has let us down, Mr. Chaboyko.
But I was going into Toshi Station to pick up some power converters.
You know what, Luke? You need to just do your job.
Familiar refrain.
Yes.
Let's bring Scooter back.
Jim, you know what? This is a tough one about this film.
Mm-hmm.
I am not sure. I don't know where else to go with this. I mean, I'm really kind of struggling with this flick, and I'm wondering if we need to maybe look at another one of his films sometime later to get a better, better idea. Kind of like what Fart Guy did. What is that next film? Let me ask you this, Jim.
Sure.
We should cover another David Lynch film. That we've only done Dune as really to try and exploit Villeneuve's Dune coming out.
Yeah.
We should do another David Lynch film. To the chat, what is the next one we should take a look at? And Jim, what's your vote?
My vote's Elephant Man. I saw that movie when I was young, and I just thought, holy crap. Like, it was one of my, if I had a top 10 list of movies that I'd seen at a certain point in my life, that was definitely in them. I just haven't seen it for a long time. Anthony Hopkins, John Hurt, crazy cast, produced by Mel Brooks, that people may or may not remember, and that great, gorgeous black. I believe it's black and white. I'm totally losing it. But yeah, I would. That's a great excuse to rewatch that one. It had a great effect on me when I was young. And it was a hell of a movie to see. Like, I thought it was amazing. So it would, like I said, it would be a good excuse to watch that one again.
Yeah. Well, I will say this: DMG is saying we should be thinking about Captain America 4. But to the chat and anybody watching who hasn't chimed in yet, what is the next David Lynch movie who we should look at? You know what?
I thought he meant that David Lynch directed Captain America 4. That's why I was doing the spit take.
But, that'd be an interesting.
Yeah,
that would be an interesting film. Where is that skit? The David Lynch, Conan O'Brien, they do the Wes Anderson does.
Yeah.
Where is that skit? David Lynch's Captain America. That's good. Sydney Barrett chimes in with Lost Highway, feels it's underrated. We will, yeah, you know what? I mean, maybe we do. I'm with you, Jim. I would love to see that, especially something early, almost like bookends on his career. I think Eraserhead is almost that's that first student film that got him noticed. And I know it wasn't. I know it wasn't a student film, but in many respects, it's that it was his coming out film. But yeah, this was his first big movie. I think worth looking at. But you know what? Lost Highway, of course, Mulholland Drive. And, we haven't even talked about his impact on television, which in some ways I think was greater. But let me put the last question, sort of a final thoughts question, Jim.
Sure.
Let me do that one more time. Final thoughts. What is his impact on film? It was only 10 movies, and one I would argue was really like, they had something they could have. It could have been a 2-hour movie of the week, but they released it on film. The Twin Peaks, what was that? Twin Peaks Fire something or other?
Fire Walk with Me.
Fire Walk with Me.
Yeah.
I mean, but let's say 10 feature films, 10 feature-length films. I think an outsized effect, but yeah, what do you think that impact was? Jim, I'll throw it to you first.
Sure. Well, I first of all, I just real quick, I wanted to comment, when Twin Peaks came out, I was in school, and I believe it was a Wednesday night show. It was mid-season, so it came out about this time. I think it was January, February. And the next day, it was the only thing people were talking about. Like, everybody would watch. All my classmates, you get to the cafeteria and you go, oh boy, let's talk about that. And that joy that he brought, that's the
Yeah.
kind of thing that I'll forever be thankful for. Just as, when you get something that's sort of that sort of compelling, and you're
Yeah.
genuinely drawn into it, you're not just watching something to kill time, but you're like drawn to it. That was something else. In terms of his effect on the rest of on cinema, I wonder if it's that he took the sensibilities almost of a different country and used those and just did his thing as an American filmmaker. Like he brought maybe the sort of artistic nuance of like maybe some European films or something to that effect, South American or Asian, and then he was able to sort of overlay that on top of the American experience. And I don't know that, and I know there's a lot more art, a lot more artistic directors out there in the States that we don't mention, or that maybe not super well known.
Yeah.
But I tend to think that maybe he's one of the ones that was allowed to do that he could bring his sensibilities into American film. And that's not a common thing, in this, especially in this day and age. It's very, you're basically telling very straightforward stories a lot of the time. And when I say American, I mean American, Canadian, North American, Western, basically. But yeah, I sort of wonder if that maybe is his ultimate effect.
No, that's an interesting point. Like there are some things you can see in his film that, I mean, something else we recently looked at, Come and See, where at times it's like, oh, that's very, Soviet cinema, arty montage, I don't want to say weird because that becomes like a backhanded, oh, it's weird.
Yeah.
But definitely, let's say, not straightforward, not the straight story. In the chat, I'm going to come to your question in a sec, Shashank. Twin Peaks is an amazing show. DMG. And this is, again, I want to go back to something, this overarching question that I've been struggling with the whole show, which also kind of makes me still on the fence. Is it weird but endearing, or is it off-putting and exclusionary? That tension in his films between the content, the ideas he's trying to express, and what he's doing with the form. Because DMG says to Shashank, pretty much all Zack Snyder's films could fit in the description to Shashank's question about Orson Welles, that it's mood rather than narrative. And here's his full question, Shashank's full question. Do you believe that you can actually make a movie about nothing, as what Orson Welles said, where the focus is on the mood rather than the narrative? Yeah, that has been my whole question about this. I think you can. I think it's incredibly difficult. I think it loses something because we are so engaged in narrative. How do you hold our attention without a hero trying to overcome an obstacle towards a goal? And I agree with DMG. Like that is, I think, my criticism of Zack Snyder. It's all moments, but nothing's earned. I think Orson Welles, especially later in his life, he was really kind of, what can I do with the form? That's what he was exploring. He was, at least near the end of his life, he wasn't as interested in the story. It's just, and I get it. Some people, they're really into the form. And then all of a sudden, once they've kind of, I've done everything, then they get into the story. And that becomes the thing. But they have such command of everything else that they're like, you're watching something that's on a whole other level. I don't know. You know what? Let me talk out of the other side of my mouth, Shashank. I don't know if you can. I'm not sure about that. What do you think, Jim?
Well, with Wells, I'm not surprised that he was looking for other ways to sort of, control his projects, because, as I understand it, almost at every turn there's a director's cut. With whether it's there's a couple of his movies famously that were cut down by the studio. Where am I? The notes, were pretty thick apparently. What's the one that he did with Charlton Heston? There's several different versions of that flying around, and he was constantly dealing with interference from the studios.
But I don't think that's what he was saying here. I think it's near the end. He did that weird documentary.
Yeah.
Well,
I just
weird.
think
That's again. I gotta purge that word when we're talking about filmmakers and their work, or if use it a lot less than I am tonight. But I think it was really kind of pushing the envelope of form and what film can do versus his struggle. Like, I mean, he was always kind of I'm the genius here.
Yeah.
I will tell you what it's going to be. But that's not, I don't know if that really is relevant to Shashank's question.
No.
As much as it's just, maybe why did Lynch make this movie the way he did?
Yeah.
No more, doesn't have to worry about unions, can let the shot run for us how long ever he wants. Yeah. This is the thing I struggle with this, Jim.
Yeah.
Great guy to his talent, but yeah, you know what? You're going over there, you're avoiding unions because all of a sudden the union says, well, we got to actually have lunchtime eventually.
Mm-hmm.
Just because you take care of your talent doesn't mean the script supervisor is.
Milkshakes and cigarettes aren't lunch, Lynch. Doesn't count. As the rep, I have to put my foot down. But
okay.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. DMG dipping into the well. More gerbil stuff in the chat. Okay. Folks, you know what? I think David Lynch is one of those filmmakers that we could spend the next several hours talking about and still not really finish with this film.
Yeah.
That said, it is, I think, time to wrap her up. We want to thank everyone in the chat, especially the newcomers, Sydney Barrett, Shashank, great to see you, Arman and Chennai, DMG always,
Mr. Bob,
Donnie Bob, thank you all so much. Fart Guy 69, great to see you. Welcome. Hope we see you next week. What is the movie next week? I know it won't be David Lynch. Not sure what it will be. But hey, that's one more opportunity for me to beg you all to like, subscribe, and all right, everyone. Thank you all very much for coming out. And if you're watching this in the replay, please comment down below. Okay, bye-bye, everybody.
Good night, Mr. Lynch.